And to Cowdoy on the front portion of the support structure of the Spartan satellite with Winston Scott translating along the right side. We can see the basketball-sized Sprint camera. He'll be temporarily stowing that until he can climb into that portable foot restraint once again. And once he's firmly in his foot restraint, he'll then be asking Kalpana Chawla for a go for Sprint operations, at which point he'll prepare the Sprint or the camera for the power-up sequence. He'll power on a transmitter by switching a small switch on the side of the sphere to the on position. And then he'll get verification back from the small structure that the lights are blinking, which will verify that the power-up sequence is completed.
Just a minute here, Steve. Okay.
and Winston, we're waiting on your go for the sprint ops.
Okay. Okay. In that case, if you guys are ready, I'll go right on. Let's see. Maybe you can get a view of the lights from here.
Bye. Okay, Winston, I'm going to go ahead and establish the link and power it on you.
Okay, I'm standing by.
Winston Scott's in the process now of powering up the small Sprint camera. While his colleague Takao Doi continuing to stow for the final time the small cable caddy.
The face towards you. Okay. As soon as you line up, you can power it on.
Now to look at the test light first.
Okay, so you just pitch it up, or the other way. Pitch it down, keep pitching it, pitch in it. There's the face, and there's the light.
How about that? It's staring out right at me. Okay, here we go. Okay, I saw the 5 flashes. I think maybe you did too.
Okay, go ahead and hit it.
Okay, there's
I
3.
saw the 3 blinks. That's good. Stand by.
Okay. And I do have to release my tether before I release the sprint. It's full tether tow complete. Okay, Takao, you need to come up and get your... Oh, you got it. Good. It's clear, sir. Proceed.
Okay, stand by.
Standing by.
Winston, you can go ahead and release your tether. Settle it.
Okay.
And make sure you stow the handle.
Roger that. Okay, tether is released. Handle is stowed. So that's what.
Don't let it go.
Okay, I got it.
Okay. And hold on to it. You may feel some thrusters firing. I got it powered up now.
Okay. I can feel very tiny thumps on it. I guess those are thruster firing. Very tiny thumps from inside of it.
Houston, tank mass is 96.9, battery charge is 96, and Winston, Houston requesting release of the free flyer.
And Columbia, Houston, you have a go for sprint release.
and you have a go to release.
Okay, Steve, here we go. I've released it, and I'm moving back out of the way.
And the Sprint camera free flyer at 6:16 a.m. Central Time as Columbia on its 220th orbit, heading southeasterly midway across the Atlantic Ocean. Pilot Steve Lindsay now in control of the camera using a joystick control. And this view now, a unique view from the autonomous extravehicular activity robotic camera, the AERCam or Sprint. A unique view looking at the overhead windows. There are two different cameras on the Sprint. This one looking at the overhead windows out over the nose of Columbia.
And Houston, we've lost video in both cameras, but we're proceeding on with the controllability test.
And Steve, we got good video down here. We got excellent video down here.
Great.
Pilot Steve Lindsay pitching the small satellite down toward the payload bay. And Lindsay using a small joystick to control the camera.
Yeah, I'm ready to start the BRT, EVA.
Stand by there at the cam while we're doing the Sprint.
Okay.
station. We're in step 6, the sprint.
Roger.
Again, this is a unique view from this remotely operated small camera, looking back and down at the payload bay of the orbiter.
So we're proceeding on to step 7.
Roger, and we're loving the view.
We don't have one right now. We had a good view, and we've lost them both on the camcorder and the computers. Make sure you guys are taking it for us.
We promise.
Steve Lindsay operating the small basketball-sized Sprint camera through a rotation and translation evaluations. He'll perform a number of translation flight tests with the Sprint camera for the next few minutes before moving on to the observation of the flight test, aiming the camera at specific hardware activities down in the payload bay that are being conducted in the meantime by astronauts Winston Scott and Takao Doi, who are just passing through 3 hours and 16 minutes of time of the spacewalk since it began at 3:09 this morning. Columbia is approaching the equator to signal the midpoint of the 220th orbit of its flight. And the Sprint camera again is hovering in front of the Spartan satellite, just above the window line of the aft flight deck of the orbiter's crew compartment.
Yes, proceed on to step 8.
Copy. Do you guys have video now?
Just came up. Do you guys see something on the ground? Hey, Houston, is your picture, picture, breaking up right now?
Yeah, it is in and out.
Okay, we're just going to raise it up a little bit. Let us know when it clears up for you.
Roger. And we got a pretty good picture now. INCO reports this is multipathing, which is characteristic of the EMU TV system.
Okay. And yes, the tank mass is 85.6, battery charge 94.
Roger.
And this view from the forward payload bay camera on board Columbia, looking out at the Sprint AERCam, which was released by the crew members just about 12 minutes ago at 6:15 a.m. Central Time. Pilot Steve Lindsay.
Back to step 6, pulse size of 300.
Roger.
Pilot Steve Lindsay is controlling the small camera, which has the ability to provide an extra set of eyes essentially during a spacewalk task to supplement comments or observations made by spacewalking crew members, and also which can be used to get exterior looks at a space station or other spacecraft. Again, this view from on board Columbia, looking at that small basketball-sized robotically commanded camera, Sprint AERCam.
Houston, we're proceeding with step 9.
Roger.
Pilot Steve Lindsay should now begin to command the Sprint AERCam into a series of rotational moves. He'll be verifying the rates of those rotations on the laptop computer he's using to control that Sprint AERCam after each command.
Takava, are you ready for the BRT power tool eval?
Yes, I have it started.
Okay, you can configure the power tool first with 6-inch extension.
Yes, it's attached.
And the settings are 3 counterclockwise, Bravo 7,
Okay.
and 30.5.
Okay.
By observing the grid lines on the Sprint AERCam, it is possible to see that it is going through its rotation as it's being commanded on board Columbia by pilot Steve Lindsay. And Sprint AERCam once again being taken through a series of translational maneuvers commanded by pilot Steve Lindsay on board Columbia. This view is from that autonomous EVA robotic camera. At the end of each of these translational moves, it moves toward the tail section of Columbia.
I'm getting a low torque message. The board is too tight.
So it didn't work. Takava, did you tried to loosen it and it didn't work. It's going to take about 3 turns.
Yeah, I couldn't rotate the boat. The boat is tightened to that. I'm getting 25.5 torque and the low torque setting. That's it.
And you are Bravo 7, right?
Yes.
You can try a few times again with the low torque message. You are allowed to do that.
And Sprint AERCam once again being taken through maneuvers. These views of the payload bay of Columbia as the Sprint AERCam continues to be commanded above it. Inside the payload bay, Winston, Scott, and Cowdoy are continuing their work.
3 boats on that number 3, and I can't rotate them.
Stand by to come.
Houston, proceeding with step 10.
Roger. Columbia, Houston for EVA, EVA 2.
Go ahead.
At Cal, we'd like for you to set the torque limiter to 30.5, then set the tool to manual ratchet, rotate counterclockwise to break the torque.
Okay, I'll try to do that.
Spacecraft communicator Bill MacArthur passing along some instructions to spacewalking astronaut Cowdoy. While the Sprint camera is being used and commanded by pilot Steve Lindsay, Winston, Scott, and Cowdoy are still out in the payload bay. Cowdoy has been involved in beginning activities to stow the crane following their evaluations and work with the crane earlier this morning during this spacewalk. We are currently 3 hours and 26 minutes into this spacewalk, which has seen the astronauts use a small orbital replacement unit and evaluate the performance and handling characteristics.
Houston, do you have a good picture of the tail?
Yes, sir, we do.
And unfortunately, that's the highest we can really go. We've got the sun right in line with the Sprint, and we don't feel it's prudent to go any higher.
No, we understand, and that's great. And we're looking at orbiter night in 4 minutes anyway. And of course, yeah, of course.
But also just go ahead.
Yeah, and of course our concern is that you know, night doesn't sneak up on you, and you have Sprint so high that it's outside the payload bay lights. But obviously you guys can assess that better than anyone else can.
Yeah, thanks. We've been looking at that. Just as a note, it looks like the video works pretty good when we're working aft. When we're pointing towards the forward of the nose, when at least from our displays, it breaks up pretty bad.
Yeah, we copy.
And Bill, we put it up a little bit high here just to look at it right now. When the sun goes down, we'll come back down and do the rest of step 12 and then step 13.
Roger.
And just give me a hack on time so I know when to do it.
Say again, Steve.
And we're just wondering when our come home time is.
And we're discussing that right now, Steve.
These views of Columbia's payload bay are being taken by that autonomous EVA robotic camera referred to as AERCam, as it's being controlled by pilot Steve Lindsay on board Columbia. Columbia is just now approaching the western coast of Australia. About 41 minutes into operations with the Sprint AERCam, pilot Steve Lindsay is commanding that Sprint AERCam into a rotational maneuver. This rotating view of the payload bay of Columbia. Columbia is just about to pass into orbital darkness, having been in daylight and the glow of the Earth's limb, as the orbiter in this view from the Sprint AERCam begins to pass into orbital darkness.
Columbia, Houston for EV2.
Right.
Yeah, to Cal, on the your reach eval on the bolts on the 4 latches, in addition to actually checking the reach, we would like for you to go ahead and see if you can react the torque by loosening and tightening the bolts.
Okay, I'll do that.
As Columbia approaches the western coast of Australia, the orbiter just passing into orbital darkness. This view of the orbital sunset and the payload bay of Columbia from the Sprint AERCam, that small autonomous EVA robotic camera that's being controlled by pilot Steve Lindsay from on board Columbia. And in the payload bay, astronaut Winston Scott continuing to monitor the free flight of this small robotically command camera, as astronaut Takao Doi continues his work with the crane and orbital replacement units. He is currently in the process of evaluating a series of power tools for use in assembly tasks.
Hey Houston, we're picking up again with step 12. Tank mass is 58.2. Battery charge is 91.
Roger.
Steve Lindsay once again calling down with systems statuses of the AERCam as he continues to command it through a series of rotational or roll maneuvers as it flies above Columbia's payload bay. Sprint AERCam has been flying free now for 45 minutes following its release by astronaut Winston Scott. Sprint AERCam now being commanded and flying overhead the Spartan spacecraft in Columbia's payload bay and continuing its translation down along the payload bay heading toward the forward portion of Columbia's payload bay.
Video.
Affirmative.
And from the forward payload bay camera on board Columbia, this view of the Sprint AERCam can be seen, the basketball-sized remotely controlled camera being controlled by Steve Lindsay on board Columbia. It can be seen with its one flashing light as it continues to be put through its paces, now just about 47 minutes or so into operations with the Sprint AERCam. And in the lower portion of the screen can be seen the two spacewalking astronauts on the left, Winston Scott, who can be identified by the red stripes on the legs of his pantsuit, and Takao Doi on the right. Winston Scott is continuing his observations of the Sprint AERCam operations as Takao Doi continues to assess the use and capability of a series of power tools. They are now currently 3 hours and 53 minutes into their spacewalk.
And Houston, Steve is centering up this picture in honor of our two Canadian Capcoms.
Yeah, Roger, unfortunately, we have sent them home, but we'll make sure they look at the replay.
I think it shows you the stability and the control that you have on this free flyer, that Steve can go ahead and use the picture and send it up on a scene or an area that he desires.
And the Sprint AERCam continuing to be put through its paces, doing a survey of the payload bay of Columbia. Just a few minutes ago, the Sprint AERCam was positioned by pilot Steve Lindsay to focus on the shuttle's rowboat arm, also sometimes called the Canadarm, as it was built in Canada. And Steve Lindsay calling down to the flight control team here in Houston that view was for astronauts Mark Garneau and Chris Hadfield, who have been working as spacecraft communicators throughout this mission. And this Sprint AERCam view now of astronaut Takao Doi as he continues to work through his spacewalk. Currently 3 hours 56 minutes into that spacewalk. He's continuing to assess the capability of a series of power tools.
And Columbia, Houston, for Sprint, to give you guys a target, we would like to initiate step 14 at 17:40 in 20 minutes.
Copy.
And that call from spacecraft communicator Bill MacArthur advising Steve Lindsay that in just about 20 minutes or so they will need to begin the process of recapturing that Sprint AERCam, concluding its free flight, which began at 6:15 a.m. Central Time.
It's still a little out of my view. I can't see it right now, but... All right. I've just been looking at all the car, and I'm glad it's working so well.
It's working super.
Outstanding.
This view of spacewalker Winston Scott just moving out of the field of view, taken by the Sprint AERCam, which is being commanded once again by Steve Lindsay on board Columbia. It's being commanded using a laptop computer and a joystick handstick controller. The Sprint AERCam has its own self-contained propulsion system that allows it to be commanded by an astronaut on board Columbia. In the future, this is a prototype, and in the future, it is designed so that it would not require the activity of an astronaut on board a spacecraft, but could be controlled by a flight control team on the ground. Winston Scott and Takao Doi are now 3 hours and 59 minutes into their scheduled spacewalk. They were scheduled to begin climbing back into Columbia's airlock in just about 7 minutes or so. However, it's likely that that time will be extended by about half an hour as work continues with the Sprint AERCam. They'll begin the process of recapturing the Sprint in just about 15 to 18 minutes and begin stowing that Sprint, and then continue through the normal cleanup activities in the payload bay.
And Columbia, Houston, for Sprint, just from the video we've seen, we haven't seen the floodlight on, and wondered if you guys had tested that out yet.
No, we haven't.
And when convenient, we'd like for you to try to work that into your activities.
Sure, we can do that.
And as AERCam is commanded into a rotational maneuver, its floodlight becomes visible. This is part of the evaluation and test of the Sprint AERCam, was to assess.
We're flying with the floodlight right now.
Was to assess how well its floodlight worked in helping to illuminate what might be a dark work site. And this view of Columbia's payload bay as that Sprint continues its free flight above the payload bay.
You can proceed to step 13.
Roger, and thanks. We see the floodlight. Looks good.
Steve Lindsay will now command the Sprint AERCam to fly over near the port sill and aim the camera directly downward to allow a view of a vertical truss of the structure on which the Spartan spacecraft is mounted. This is a test of the thrusters on board, calibrating how they perform.
And Columbia Houston, for Sprint, we can see the arm in this picture. When it's convenient for you, we'd like to see the difference with the floodlight on and off.
Copy. And you're looking at the arm right now. That's with the light off, or with the light on. And I'll zoom in. Okay, and here's light off. And you said we can't tell any difference. I think we got too much ambient lighting from the payload bay lights.
Hey, Roger.
Steve Lindsay commanding the Sprint AERCam for a view of the shuttle's robot arm, the extreme tip of that robot arm, in order to assess how well the floodlight on that Sprint AERCam helps in illuminating an otherwise dark scene. That view was captured both with the floodlight on and with it off, and the flight control team here on the ground and pilot Steve Lindsay on board Columbia both commenting that with the ambient lighting from the floods and the payload bay lights, that there was no readily observable difference between the time that the lights were on or off.
We see the one of the gas can lids there in the field of view, which looks like it's in shadow from the payload bay floods. How about trying to toggle with the Sprint floodlight on that and see if we can see a difference? Okay, lights coming on now. We
you can see the scene brighten up a little bit. It's kind of hard to say. Light's coming off now. And you can see it brighten it up a little bit.
Hey, Roger.
And with the Sprint AERCam focused on one of the getaway special canisters, or gas cans as they're called in Columbia's payload bay. Once again, the floodlight on that.
13, battery charge is 89, tank mass is 41.
Roger.
Once again, the floodlight toggled on and off on that free-flying Sprint AERCam, the remotely commanded camera, to see how well that floodlight on the camera would help illuminate an otherwise dark scene. And this time with the gas can partially shaded from the payload bay lights on board Columbia, that test showing a difference in the viewing capability when the floodlight for Sprint AERCam was turned on and then toggled back off. Spacewalking astronauts Winston, Scott, and Takao Doi remain in the payload bay of Columbia. They're continuing to perform their tasks. Takao Doi continuing to evaluate some power tools as he continues to work through his tasks, and Winston Scott continuing to monitor the performance of this free-flying camera. The two astronauts are currently 4 hours, 8 minutes into their planned 4.5-hour-long spacewalk, which is likely to be extended by about 30 to 35 minutes as work continues with this remotely commanded camera, the autonomous EVA robotic camera called AERCam.
Number 3 latch and number 4 latch evaluation is complete.
Great, Takao. So latch 1 is left?
Latch 1 and 2. But in order to access to latch number 1 and 2, I need to use my left hand.
Okay. Did you want to try and see how that works?
It's kind of tough because I am right-handed.
So basically the reach is not good.
Not good. So not 1 and 2.
And you cannot install your BRT at a suitable location where you can get it.
Yeah, of course I can.
Get it from the right hand.
Yeah, I can install. I can change the BRT location in order to access to number 1. But at one position, I can only access to number 3 and 4, or number 1 and 2.
And happy to talk. And Houston, Columbia for EVA.
Go ahead, Casey.
Yeah, according to our notes, the car is supposed to do the BRT valve from the aft FSC handrail. Though if you want to see reacting to torque, it makes sense to go ahead and move the BRT to a different location. Do you concur?
We're discussing it, Casey.
On the Casey, the torque setting number 3 and 4 and 5, I can pretty much hold that tilt my body and hold this power tool.
Oh, I see. That's good input, Takao.
And Columbia, Houston for EV. KC, it's just about time to break out from this task anyhow. So if you would have Takao complete his current BRT tasks, and then he can proceed to tool stowage.
Copy.
And
that call from spacecraft communicator.
Verify from the cable caddy, did you bring the adjustable tool tether that
Yes.
Winston had left there?
Yes, I got the adjustable tether from the tool caddy. It's attached to my mini workstation.
The spacecraft communicator Bill MacArthur informing EV2, that spacewalking astronaut 2, Takao Doi, that it's time to break out of the task that he has been performing. That is, that while he's been restrained with a body restraint tether, he has been assessing the performance of a power tool on board, gauging the torque and different capabilities and handling characteristics of that power tool, and he'll now begin to conclude that activity. And shortly he and Winston Scott will begin the process of cleaning up the payload bay following what so far has been a 4-hour, 13-minute long spacewalk. And these views, a close-up view of the crew cabin of Columbia, taken with Sprint AERCam, the autonomous EVA robotic camera. The crew members inside can be seen waving back at that remotely controlled camera, which is being commanded by pilot Steve Lindsay on board.
And Takao, you can start heading towards the airlock with your power tool, and if you can please verify you have all your tethers.
Okay.
And Houston for Sprint, we're starting with step 14. Returning for capture. Stand by there, Winston.
All set. Okay, KC, I have 2 adjustable tethers and 2 retractable tethers. The one adjustable tether came from cable caddy.
And that's a good count, Takao. You can start heading towards the airlock, and on the way, if you like, you can get your fasteners.
Okay.
Likewise.
Steve Lindsay has begun commanding the AERCam. In a return for capture, it will be flown towards spacewalking astronaut Winston Scott, who will once again grab hold of that basketball-sized, remotely controlled camera as it concludes its free flight. AERCam has been flying free now for just over an hour following its release at 6:15 a.m. Central Time, conducting visual surveys of Columbia's payload bay, while its handling characteristics have been assessed by the crew members. Winston Scott observing that entire free flight, which is being commanded by pilot Steve Lindsay. And in the lower left-hand portion of this view, astronaut Winston Scott beginning to lean back in his portable foot restraint as the Sprint AERCam is being commanded toward him for capture.
Okay. Okay, I see it. Starting to come into view. Top light.
And the autonomous EVA robotic camera, AERCam, very, very slowly now being flown toward astronaut Winston Scott, who's visible in the left-hand lower portion of this view.
Okay, Winston, after you grab it, power it off till I say so.
Okay. It's still about a foot away from me. Stepping in nicely. Oh, 6 ring inches. Oh, about 4 inches or so out of reach. Keep it coming. Down a couple of inches. I can feel the thrusters on my glove. Okay. I've got the free flyer.
Copy that, stand by.
So let me get a tether on it before you disable it.
And the free-flying camera now back in the hands of astronaut Winston Scott, concluding 1 hour and 12 minutes of free flight.
Oh, okay. Let me go and do that.
Winston Scott will now attach a tether to the Sprint AERCam and tether it to the handrail. And when that's concluded,
Steve.
Okay, stand by.
and with the Sprint AERCam now tethered to a handrail on Columbia's payload bay, pilot Steve Lindsay will begin the process of powering down that camera that he has been remotely commanding for the past hour and 12 minutes.
You can go ahead and power it off.
Okay. And the free flyer is powered off. Well, that flight went so well.
Just like we planned.
All right. Outstanding.
And Houston, Columbia, I'd just like to pass on to the entire Sprint team. You know, it's a real small group of people working on this, and they work very hard, and I think we got a real winner here. They hit a home run. You can pass on that the flying motors were definitely level 1. It flew even better than I expected, so we're real pleased, and I think we got a real good piece of technology for use maybe on a station and later shuttle flights.
Thanks for those words, Steve, and they were listening.
Did you get your stuff there?
Yes.
Okay, then the next thing would be to get the adjustable pull stringer inside, and then the tool bag inside.
Okay.
And I'm putting it in the 7th half hole from forward.
Okay, 7 half hole from forward.
Now 4 hours, 25 minutes into a spacewalk, this view of astronaut Winston Scott, who's identifiable by the red stripes around the legs of his spacesuit, working along the side of Columbia's payload bay. The astronauts Winston Scott and Takao Doi beginning the process of cleaning up their tools.
Go ahead.
The forward jets are getting cold again. We think initiating the Mephisto maneuver will take care of that problem. You have a go at any time to initiate that maneuver, just whenever the crew's in a good position for you to maneuver.
Okay.
All right, all right.
And that's about a 4.5-minute maneuvered attitude.
All right.
Just to the right of astronaut Winston Scott can be seen the AERCam, that autonomous EVA robotic camera that has just concluded about an hour and 12 minutes worth of free flight. It's been mounted and tethered to one of the handrails along the side of Columbia's payload bay. And in the very foreground, a portion of the spacesuit being worn by